Shall we begin, sir? Shaju, sir?
Yes, തുടങ്ങാം.
Okay. Grigory, please start.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening to all. We have gathered here for the orientation session on National Educational Policy organized by IEDC IIC Cell of St. Peter's College, Kolancheri. The National Education Policy 2020, which was approved by the Union Cabinet of India on 29 July 2020, outlines the vision of India's new education system. The new policy replaces the previous National Policy of Education 1986. National Education Policy focuses on the National Research Foundation because innovation is one of the most important parts for a country to progress. Only when research and innovation are strong enough, we will be able to progress in this competitive world. The NEP will promote skill based education and enhance the practical skill of students. Hence, it is important not only for the teachers and students, but also the entire society to understand its importance in the current scenario. I welcome you all to this session. In prayer, In prayer, it is better to have a heart without words than words without a heart, says Mahatma Gandhi. Let us welcome Sri Lashmi of second year BCom for the prayer.
നന്മയാകുന്ന കാന്തി കാണുവാൻ കണ്ണിനാകീണമേ നല്ല വാക്കിൻ്റെ ശീലു ചൊല്ലുവാൻ നാവിനാകീണമേ സ്നേഹമാകുന്ന ഗീതമോ എന്റെ കാത്തിടയാതീ സത്യമെന്നുള്ള ശീലമോടി ഞാൻ ശാന്തിയറിയണമേ
I invite Dr. Sona S. Dev, the Nodal Officer of IEDC and the convener of IIC of our college, to welcome us all to this program.
Good evening, one and all attending this session on National Education Policy 2020. We are all aware that the 34-year-old National Education Policy underwent a reform this year when the Union Cabinet approved reforms which are expected to usher in a new era in Indian education system. The one big point that the policy aspires is to move towards a holistic education and not just textbook learning. Today, we have an eminent resource person talking in detail about the policy. So I don't want to take much time. I hereby welcome Dr. Shaju Verghese, our principal, who has extended all his support for the conduct of this program. We have with us Dr. Samuel J. Kurivilla, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, University of Kerala, as a research person. He was previously a postdoctoral fellow at the School of International Relations and Politics of Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He received his doctorate in 2009 from the University of Exeter, UK, within the faculties of both theology and politics. His latest book is Radical Christianity in Palestine, Israel, Liberation and Theology in the Middle East. We are certainly grateful to him for readily accepting our invitation. On behalf of our college, I cordially welcome you, sir, to this session. I would also like to welcome Sri Jean Verghese, Head of the Department of Chemistry and our IQAC Coordinator, and Dr. Renu Susan Samuel, Assistant Nodal Officer and President IIC SPC. Dr. Renu was the main driving force who worked with utmost dedication and sincerity for organizing this session. Finally, with utmost pleasure, I welcome all the faculties within and outside the college, research scholars, and students who have spared their valuable time in attending this session. Thank you once again.
Thank you, ma'am. For the presidential address, I would like to invite our beloved principal of St. Peter's College, Kolancheri, Dr. Shaju Varghese.
Good evening, Mananjo. Samsara Namaskaram. Okay. Basil's സുഹൃത്താണ് സീനിയർ ആയിരുന്നു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു അല്ലേ? തൊട്ട് സീനിയർ ആയിരുന്നു ബേസിലിന്റെ.
സാർ എന്നോടായിരുന്നു, കേട്ടില്ല.
ബേസിലിന്റെ സീനിയർ ആയിരുന്നോ?
ഞാൻ അതെ ബേസിലിന്റെ സീനിയർ ആയിരുന്നു.
ഓക്കെ. ബേസിൽ പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നു. Welcome to St. Peter's College.
Thank you.
Okay. Gina Varghese, IQAC coordinator. Dr. Sona Anian, IEC nodal officer. Renu Susan, assistant nodal officer of IEDC. Basil, other faculty members of St. Peter's College. Dear students, ഏതായാലും IEDCയുടെ ഒരു പ്രോഗ്രാം എന്നുള്ള നിലയിൽ ന്യൂ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസിയെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള ഒരു ചർച്ചയാണ് ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾ സംഘടിപ്പിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. അതിന് സാറാണ് എത്തിയിരിക്കുന്നത്, സാമുവൽ ജേക്കബ് സാറ്. അദ്ദേഹം ഈ കാര്യത്തിൽ വളരെ വിദഗ്ധനാണ് എന്ന് ഞാൻ ബേസിലിനോടാണ് ആദ്യമേ സംസാരിച്ചത്. ബേസിൽ ഉടൻ തന്നെ സാമുവൽ സാറിന്റെ പേര് പറയുകയാണ് ഉണ്ടായത്. ഞാൻ ഒന്ന് കോണ്ടാക്ട് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കട്ടെ എന്ന് പറയുക ഉടൻ തന്നെ ഏതായാലും സാർ സമ്മതിച്ചു. സന്തോഷം. ഈ ഓൺലൈൻ മീറ്റിങ്ങുകളാണ്. ഇതിന്റെ ഇടയിൽ ഏതൊക്കെ മാറിക്കഴിയുമ്പോൾ സാർ കോളേജിൽ വരണം. കോളേജിൽ വന്ന് വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളും ഒക്കെ ആയിട്ട് നേരിട്ട് സംവദിക്കാനായിട്ട് ഒരു അവസരം കൂടി തരണം എന്ന് മാത്രം പറഞ്ഞു. കോളേജിലെ വ്യവസായ സംരംഭക പരിശീലന ക്ലബ്ബ് എന്ന് വേണമെങ്കിൽ പറയാം. ഈ ക്ലബിന്റെ ആദ്യം നടത്തുന്നത് നാഷണൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഹയർ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷനിൽ മാത്രമല്ല, എലിമെന്ററി ലെവൽ മുതൽ ഹയർ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ വരെ ഓരോ കാലഘട്ടത്തിലും വ്യത്യസ്തമായ ചിന്താധാരകൾ ഉൾപ്പെടുത്തിക്കൊണ്ട് സാംസ്കാരികവും സാമൂഹികവും അക്കാദമികവുമായ മികവുകൾ ദേശീയ ഒരേപോലെ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ടാണ് നാഷണൽ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസി വിഭാവനം ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അങ്ങനെയാണ്. അതിൽ മെറിറ്റ് ഉണ്ടാവാം, ഡിമെറിറ്റ് ഉണ്ടാവാം. ഇതിനു മുൻപ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന ആദ്യത്തെ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ മിനിസ്റ്ററായ മൗലാന അബ്ദുൽ കലാം ആസാദ് മുതൽ തുടങ്ങിയ ഈ ചിന്താ പദ്ധതി ഇപ്പോഴെത്തി നിൽക്കുന്ന കാലം വരെയും മെറിറ്റും ഡികളും ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. അത് വലിയ ചർച്ചകൾക്ക് വിധേയമായിട്ടുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെയാണ് ലോകത്തിന് മുൻപിൽ ഭാരതം വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ രംഗത്തെ ഏറ്റവും മുൻപന്തിയിൽ നിന്ന് മാതൃകയായി തീർന്നിട്ടുള്ളതും. ഏതായാലും ഈ സെമിനാറിന് എല്ലാവിധമായ ആശംസകളും നേർന്നുകൊണ്ട് ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി എല്ലാ ആശംസകളും എല്ലാവർക്കും നേർന്നുകൊണ്ട് നിർത്തുന്നു. നന്ദി, നമസ്കാരം. ചർച്ച ഗംഭീരമാകട്ടെ. സാംസാറിന് പ്രത്യേകം നന്ദി.
Thank you, sir. I welcome IQAC coordinator and head of the Department of Chemistry, Sri Gina Varghese, to felicitate the gathering.
Kelkamo.
Yes, sir, it's audible.
Good evening. Respected Principal Dr. Shaju Varghese, Chief Guest of the day, Dr. Samuel Jacob Kurula, Faculty Department of Political Science, University of Kerala, Dr. Sona S. Dev, Nodal Officer of Innovation and Entrepreneurship Development Cell of the College, Dr. Renu Susan Samuel, Assistant Nodal Officer, teachers, research scholars, and dear students. Our IEDC is organizing a series of activities for the benefit of student community of our college. And this seminar on National Education Policy 2020 is the latest one. I understand that many more programs are in the pipeline. The Government of India has announced its new education policy last year, which proposes innovative and radical measures to cater the need of the hour. The think tanks try to blend the concept of innovation, entrepreneurship, and skill development in higher education. The impact of some of the concepts are highly debatable. We have to critically evaluate the pros and cons before its practical implementation, since its consequences are far-reaching. Innovation is not only a development of new products, but it is a state of mind to experiment on something which is existing. Today, we have with us an eminent scholar, Dr. Samuel, who can ignite deliberations on the policy and political aspects of national education policy. On behalf of IQAC of our college, I take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Sona, Dr. Renu, and their associates at IEDC for the effort they are putting in for the smooth running of the cell, and a special thanks to Dr. Basil for arranging the resource person. I wish all the best for the program and to the IED cell. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am profusely elated to take an opportunity to invite our resource person, Dr. Samuel Jacob Kurula, Assistant Professor of Department of Political Science, Kerala University, Thiruvananthapuram, to lead the orientation session on national education policy.
Right. Friends, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me for your talk. And I hope I'm audible. എന്നെ കേൾക്കാമല്ലോ അല്ലേ? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the National Education Policy 2020, right, was a policy that came out in the middle of a pandemic, right? We were all stuck at home when the policy was officially declared, and it became law and it was passed by Parliament. And of course, prior to being passed by Parliament, from 2019 onwards, we had gone through a series of consultations at the governmental level, right from the grassroots to two parliamentary committees. A process was gone through to devise the national education policy, right? And when we look at the 11 members, committee members of the National Education Policy 2019 as well as 20, chaired by eminent academician and space scientist K. Kasturirangan, what we see is, we see a document that has a lot of potential. It's a document that is very aspirational, but it remains to be seen how much of this aspiration can be converted into an actual work on the ground, right? So how I have designed my presentation today is to first give you a broad overview of India's education policy, mainly relating to the many commissions that were commissioned by the government of India to reform education, national education in India. And then I will deal with the 2020's NEP's recommendations, particularly the recommendations at the school level, followed by going on to the college and professional level. And finally, I will end with a discussion of the NEP as a whole, and look at some of the criticisms that have come up, because in the last 6 months, we have seen a lot of material, a lot of articles have been written on this NEP, right? And those criticisms are still very relevant today, right? Because we are yet to see how effectively this policy will be implemented, or if it can be implemented, in its wholeness. So that will be the broad structure of my presentation. Now, the first ever University Education Commission, right, which is also known as the Radhakrishnan Commission, because it was led by our first, by the great philosopher and a former president of India, Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. And this was the first ever commission in the post-independence period, 1948 to 49 period, right? And this was followed. I will not go into the details of each commission here due to lack of time. This was followed by the Secondary Education Commission of 1952 to 53, right, which focused on education after the primary level and before. Basically, it focused on school education, right? So that was the Secondary Education Commission of 52 to 53. And then, of course, comes the most famous commission, education commission of all, which was the Education Commission of 64 to 66, also known to all of us as the Kothari Commission, right? Possibly one of the most famous of the education commissions of India, right? Chaired by the famous scholar, Dr. D.S. Kothari. And this commission put before us a holistic approach to education and provided certain detailed guidelines to the government, to reform every stage of education from the primary to the postgraduate level, right? So this commission is one of the most important of our education commissions, right? And the Kothari Commission was followed in that decade itself by the National Policy on Education, which was based almost totally on the Kothari Commission. So that was in 1968, right? And the present NEP actually seeks to or claims that it is the next successor to the Kothari Commission. So after 1968, the NEP claims to be the next authoritative commission or policy document on higher education, on education as a whole, from pre-primary to the professional level in India, right? And of course, before we come to that, in 1976, we had the 42nd constitutional amendment, which included education in the concurrent list, right? So, that became both the prerogative of the state as well as the union government, right? And before that, before 1976, it was on the state list, right? So the center now had a direct role in formulating policies regarding general education in India, right? And in 1986, during the then Rajiv Gandhi ministry, a national policy on education in 1986, a national policy on education was framed, which had a special emphasis on seeking to equalize the educational spectrum of India, right? Because by the 1980s, it had become quite evident that Indian education was deeply skewed, and there was clearly an elite that had been benefiting from public education as well as from access to elite institutions, right? And a vast majority of people who were sidelined. So the National Policy on Education, NPE of 1986, had a special emphasis on seeking to at least pave the way for the equalization of the field, by especially having a focus on women, scheduled tribes, and scheduled castes, right? And this NPE was later modified in 1992. And again, in the CMP of the first UPA government, the Common Minimum Program of the first UPA government in 2004, more or less followed on this National Policy on Education, right? And of course, in 2009, we had the right of children to free and compulsory education, right? That act was passed in 2009, which made elementary education a fundamental right for every child, right? So that was a major evolution in our educational policies. And then in 2016, in the present government's first term in office, what we see is the TSR Subramaniam Committee, right, which we could say is the precursor to the present national education policy. So the TSR Subramaniam Committee, or Committee for the Evolution of a New Educational Policy, brought out its report in 2016. And this report sought to lay out the kind of changes that can be brought about, right, in our education system. And then year before last, we had the draft National Education Policy Report, or what is popularly known as the K. Kasturirangan Committee Report, right, which placed its report on the table on May 31st, 2019. And this again, sought to take up various challenges in our educational system, in our present educational system, such as the challenges to access to education, equity of education, quality of education, affordability, and accountability. Right. So these were the main points that were sought to be addressed by the Kasturirangan Committee report, which is the precursor to our present national education policy. And finally, last year, the National Education Policy Report came out. Right. Now, the text of the report, shall we say, the brief text of the report is available on the net for all to read, as well as the very long Kasturirangan Committee report of 2019, right, which runs into hundreds of pages. Right, both are available for reading online. And what we can see, as I said in this first part of my presentation, I'll be looking at exactly what the report, the policy document says regarding primary education, right? So one good thing about the report is that the right to education eligibility, right, has been extended from which was previously in the age bracket of 6 to 14 years, has now been brought into the age bracket of 3 to 18 years, right? So this, at least on paper, is a good move, because the education span of the individual, of the young person, has been extended, right? And again, the policy document states that the goal is to achieve by 2030, 100% school going process. Now we are now in 2021, right? And 2030 is just 9 years from now. So, I mean, I probably have to start my criticism or my comments about this document and the applicability of this document right now. Given the diversity of this nation and the the kind of infrastructural challenges that we face in this country, right? And the diversity of educational systems that are prevalent across this nation. This goal of achieving 100% school ready children by 2030 seems a bit far-fetched, right? But hopefully, if the government can proceed, can get its act together, it might be achievable, but I have my doubts. Anyhow, what we can see is in this first part of the report, which focuses on the early childhood care and education, right? ECCE. That is the terminology that has been devised. And in this part, what the document says is that it calls for heavy investment in infrastructure, in playground equipment, in Anganwadi training, teachers training, putting Anganwadi workers through a 6-month certification course, right? These are all things that have been laid down on paper. And the issue about this thing is that we are not a uniform country, right? We have different standards of education that are prevalent in different parts of this nation. Right? We cannot compare Kerala to Uttar Pradesh, right? It is even difficult to compare Kerala to Karnataka. So, and of course, the south of India is much ahead in providing access to education, in providing better facilities to primary education and pre-primary education than the rest of the country, right? So, it remains to be seen how exactly the government is going to proceed in this high aims that they have set down. Hopefully, something can be achieved, right? And again, one of the things that we can see in the pre-primary and primary recommendations is that teacher vacancies will be filled up, right, in the government sector, where priority will be given to disadvantaged areas and to such sections of society. Now, this is it's very good on paper again. It remains to be seen the extent to which it can be worked out, right? Anyhow, the aim that the government has set before it is 100% GER, gross enrollment ratio, by 2030, right? And this is going to be achieved by heavily in investing in infrastructure and training of teachers and recruitment of teachers right up to the 12th standard, right? As well as ensuring that social workers and counselors are available for students. Because one of the main drawbacks that the Indian education, especially the Indian public education system, faces is the high rate of dropouts, right? And again, of course, here, when we are talking here in Kerala, it's difficult to think of this because we have a low rate of dropouts here in Kerala. But of course, we are talking about India as a whole, where in the case of migrant workers, guest workers, as we call them in Kerala, they have more or less a tendency to take their children and families along with them as they travel across the country in search of work. So obviously, children drop out of school. And, you just need to go to the cities, to the major cities of this country in the south of this nation to see how many children, right, children of laborers are out of school, right, helping their parents. So this kind of an aim is good on paper, but remains to be seen how much of it can be actually worked out in practice, right? Because the National Education Policy talks of a rigorous tracking of 100% of children to ensure that no children is left out, right? And there is also a mention of public-private partnership school models. Again, these are good aspirations that have indeed been tried out in a number of states. Right, and again, of course, the document doesn't really provide any clarity on the number of social workers and counselors that are going to be recruited, and the way in which they're going to be appointed, right? So as of now, we have Anganwadi workers, we have Asha workers, and in addition to these, what are the other kind of social workers that are going to be recruited. In that case, there is still a lack of clarity in the document, as well as regarding child marriage and child labor. Right? These are both issues, though illegal, as we know, are still practiced in this nation. And many times the school dropout rate is because of these factors, right? Because of the the child labor and the illegal child marriages that are going on. So the document lacks a clear mention of the kind of punitive measures that can be taken to prevent these things from happening, right? And of course, one positive thing that has come out in the document is the fact that local languages have been encouraged, right? So up to standard 5, the local language of the state is to be the medium of instruction, right? And thereby bilingual education, is being promoted, right? And again, new kind of subjects, new age subjects such as coding and computational thinking, computer science and allied disciplines are being offered right from the middle school level, as well as in secondary school. The student now has an option to choose courses, right? So a student can opt to focus primarily on the arts, or on the physical sciences, or on vocational education. And this is something that has been there in the Western educational system for many, many years, right? And that thing was not there here in India, and that has been mentioned in the policy document. So again, if that works out, it will be very good, right? Now, regarding the issue of language, right? As we all know, in the central school system, they follow the 3-language formula, right? And even in our state school system here in Kerala, we have the 3-language formula, right? But there are state schools, there are schools or states where the 3-language is not followed, right? Where it is more or less the 2-language. So in that sense, the document is a bit vague about that, right? Because it says that you can use local languages wherever possible. That is the correct terminology that is used in the document. So that means, are you going to continue with the existing status quo? That is something that is a bit vague in the document, right? Right. And then to go on, the document talks about integrating Indian knowledge systems, right? That is the correct terminology that is used. And by that, what is meant is yoga, Indian philosophy, and Adivasi and indigenous ways of learning in the syllabus, right? That has been included in the syllabus, right? And then again, national textbooks have been proposed, right? National textbooks. So we already have the NCERT system of textbooks. But of course, what we see is, particularly at the central school level, we see that many schools, particularly in the private sector, private network, do not use these NCERT books. They use other books. So this document kind of re-emphasizes that national textbooks should be used, right? Right. So, right, to go on, yeah, regarding the examination system, what we can see is the issue of a national testing agency, right? NTA is already functional, and that policy is sought to be mentioned in the document, right? A national testing agency that will really take over so many of the examinations that are, many of which are overlapping examinations. So in that sense, if the kind of pressure on the students can be reduced, right? If a uniformity of assessment is brought in, right, and the multiplicity of examinations are reduced, that would be a very positive development, right? So that is something that certainly is a plus point in the policy document. And then what we see is there is mention about promoting Olympiads and such kinds of tests that seek to locate gifted students, right? That kind of mention is provided there. Scholarships, Olympiads, and such programs that will identify gifted students, and particularly among the financially deprived sections also. This kind of a identification is provided. But again, of course, what we see in practice is those who are financially forward are able to benefit much more from these kind of tests and examinations, and those who are financially backward cannot even afford the preparation for these entrances, right? So that is something that is lacking in the document, as to how exactly the issue of equity in public education will be resolved, right? Okay. So again, another important point is that a national book promotion policy is mentioned, right? This is a very important issue because India is possibly India and South Asia in general is one of the regions in the world where reading as a art, as a skill that students have to inculcate from their childhood itself, that policy is very backward in our country, right? We have a serious lack of access to books. We have a serious lack of access to libraries, right? And remember that we are not talking specifically about Kerala here. We are talking about a national level. So you go away from the cities, and what you see is an incredibly deprived rural area, rural countryside, with seriously disadvantaged people, and an education system that is ramshackle, to be very frank. So when we talk of books, if the national education policy is mentioning this is a very positive development. And again, as I said, it remains to be seen how this will work out in practice. So a national books promotion policy is mentioned, right? And again, so now this much I have said about the school level, right? And now I will go on to the higher education level. In the higher education level, one of the important developments in this document is the 2-year B.Ed degree that is currently the norm is sought to be transformed into a 4-year B.Ed undergraduate program, right? So in short, when you join for a degree program in any discipline, you will end up with a 4-year B.Ed degree also, right? So that is something that is good, but it still remains to be worked out in practice, right? And again, what we can see is, according to the document, online training, online teaching, MOOCs massive online, open online courses are promoted, right? So teacher training programs in the online mode are being promoted in the document. And again, what we see is there is a lot of priority being given to teachers training, right? Which is extremely good because our teachers have to be trained according to the latest technologies and educational know-how. So this this is provided in the document, right? And again, when we come to the issue of remuneration, right, salaries, what we see is graduate teachers, those who have a graduate degree, you know, are actually being paid very less, right? Private schools in this country pay teachers, you know, who have a graduate degree plus a B.Ed, right, a very paltry salary, right? So this is something that needs to be changed. So in the document, you know, there is no clarity about the reforming the salary structure, right? So that is something that really has to be brought into the document, I think, possibly in a later version of the document, right? And of course, that will be related to the amount of money that the government is willing to put into education, right? Right now in this country, we do not meet the projected target of investment in education that the UN has set, right? We spend much more on arms and buying military hardware and such things than we do on, you know, than we do on education in this country, right? So that is something that really needs to be changed, right? And again, what we can see is performance-based pay and incentives is being provided, right, in the document, where incentive or pay will be provided based on the performance of the teachers, right? And again, the so-called gender inclusion fund is proposed in the document, which seeks to support female and transgender students, right? This has been mentioned in the document, which is again a very good proposal. Now, what we need to understand is when we look at the education system in this country right now, what we can see is we have a very developmentally skewed system of education, right? A culture of inclusion is promoted in the document, but how exactly this culture of inclusion can be worked out is something that still remains to be seen. You know, when we look at the educational condition of minorities in this nation, right? Minorities actually deserve a lot of support from the state, right? But we do not see that specifically mentioned in the document, right? Because minority education is very backward in this country. And of course, we are not talking about Kerala here. So again, when we take up this issue of the gross enrollment ratio, right? Gross enrollment ratio, GER. GER is proposed to be 100% in 2030. I mentioned that earlier. And the entire new education policy is sought to be implemented by 2040, which means that in the next 20 years, the whichever government is in power, has their hands really tied up, in the sense that if they want to follow through with this document, the government is going to have the resources and be willing to spend literally millions of rupees in the field of education in this nation, right? If they want to meet these very ambitious deadlines. Because as I said earlier, what we have in this country is a very skewed system of education, where there are different standards in the public and private sphere, right? And if the government is proposing to make a single standard in both the public and private sphere, that is extremely ambitious, right? That is extremely ambitious on the part of the government. It remains to be seen whether in the next 19 years this will be achieved or not, right? And then there are some cosmetic changes that have to be mentioned. The familiar MHRD, or Ministry of Human Resource and Development, is now known as the Ministry of Education, right? It was previously, many years ago, it was known as the Ministry of Education. Now that name has come back. And again, the document proposes that the center and states will work together to increase public investment in education to 6% of the GDP. Currently, this stands at less than 3%. And this is for the figure of 2018 to 19. Right? So the document proposes that the center and state will together work to increase this. Right? Now, one good thing that is there provided in the document is that in addition to the midday meal program, breakfast is also being provided, right? So breakfast for students is being added to the midday meal program. Now, in states like Kerala, this was already in practice, right? But this possibly this is Kerala has been an inspiration for this NEP, right? So this system is sought to be practiced or transported across the nation. And again, the Higher Education Commission of India, HECI, is being proposed, right? The NEP 2020 proposes the Higher Education Commission of India, which seeks to replace all the present regulatory bodies such as the University Grants Commission, the UGC, the All India Council for Technical Education, AICTE. These will all be replaced by one overarching body known as the Higher Education Commission of India, right? And this is still in the process, right? As of 2021, we still have the UGC in place. We still have the AICTE. The implementation of this Higher Education Commission of India, HECI, is still in the process, right? And again, a National Professional Standards for Teachers, NPST, National Professional Standards for Teachers. The aim is to make the recruitment of teachers transparent. Because right now, as we are all aware, in the private sector, there is no transparency in the recruitment of teachers, right? So the government proposes to bring about, to make this recruitment of teachers transparent. But again, it needs to be mentioned that the salary structure of teachers, particularly in the private sector, as I mentioned earlier, has to be regulated by the government if true transparency can be achieved, right? And similar to the quality assessment and accreditation system in the colleges, a school quality assessment and accreditation framework has been provided in the document, SQAAF, right? These are all things that still remain to be worked out. Anyhow, these are the good points in the document relating to the school education. And what we see is in the higher education framework, in the higher education area, a 50% GER, gross enrollment ratio, is sought to be achieved by 2035 in higher education, right? 50% GER is sought to be achieved by 2035. Now, currently, this is at a 26.4%. That is 26.4% of boys and girls in this country who graduate from high school, who finish their school education, go into some sort of higher education, right? Whether it is ITI or polytechnic or college degree education or professional education. And this is sought to be increased to 50% by 2035. That again, it looks, at least from when we view it from this time, it looks like it is relatively achievable, but remains to be seen, right? What we see is out of this national education policy, one institution that has already started functioning and functioning relatively successfully is the NT, National Testing Agency, which has taken over many of the responsibility of conducting many of the common entrance exams in this country. And that is mentioned in the document, and that is now in practice, right? And what we see is in the college level, right? In the college level, an option to complete your degree after a break. So you join for your degree program, and then in between you run into financial difficulties, or you have some kind of social problems, you have a problem at home, and you are forced to stop your studies, right? But then there is an option provided in the national education policy that you can later complete your degree, right? But this is yet to effectively be put into practice. Anyhow, the policy of credit transfers, transferring your college education from one college to the other, even from one university to the other, has been mentioned in the document, right? So these are all unclear. The details are yet to be worked out, right? And over the next 15 years, colleges will be given autonomy, right? So the college in which you are studying, this college, will over the next 15 years be given autonomous status, right? This is what has been mentioned here. Affiliation to universities will be ended, and similar in our state we have many autonomous colleges. Their autonomy will be further enhanced, so they are able to award degrees on their own, right? So the system of deemed to be university, will also end, right? So the document seeks to bring about a certain uniformity and clarity in higher education in India. And certainly, when we look at the issue of private education, right? Private education, as you all know, in India is highly remunerative and is an area where high fees are charged, right? Private higher education. We have many new institutions that have come up, private institutions, private colleges, universities, where a high fee cap is there, high fees are charged, right? And this document seeks to put a cap on the fees that are being charged by private institutions. So no longer would private institutions be able to charge fees that run into lakhs of rupees per annum. And thereby ensuring that only elite students from the elite groups can enter these universities and colleges. right? So that kind of a move is mentioned in this document. But again, it is yet to be put into practice, right? So what we see is MPhil, the MPhil degree will be discontinued in the area of higher education. The MPhil degree will be discontinued, and postgraduate MA programs will primarily be for 1 year or maximum 2 years. At present, it is 2 years, but in many countries in the world, you have an MA program that is of 1 year duration, right? So the graduate degree, your BA degree, BA, BEd will be for 4 years, right? And you have the option to also exit at 3 with just a BA degree. Your PG post-graduation will be for 1 or maximum of 2 years, and there will be no MPhil, and those who want to do research can directly go into their PhD, right? This is what is mentioned in the document. Now, when we think about this document from a critical point of view, and when I started this talk, I mentioned that I might be a bit critical, right? Because when we look at the history of educational reform in this country, right, we really lag behind so many other nations that that achieved independence, or that achieved sovereignty even later than us, right? And especially in South Asia, higher education or education from the school level onwards is in an extremely poor state, right, when you compare with the rest of the world. So when you look at this document, right, this document is a visionary document, but it is also a document that doesn't provide much relief for the poor sections of society, for deprived sections of society, for religious minorities, for women, and for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, right? We don't find sufficient safeguards in the document, right? The commitment, for example, that public investment in education will reach 6% of GDP is just mentioned, but how will it work out in practice, right? That is not really clear in the document. And again, the 3-language formula issue. One thing that we should remember is that understand that here in the South, in many of our states, we learn Hindi, right, as a language in school. We learn Hindi, but in the North, there is no third language that is being taught, right? The local state dialect might be, if it is a language, it might be taught, but no South Indian language is taught in the North, right? So, the whole issue of the 3-language formula and the fact that, there is a lot of suspicion, particularly in the South, about the so-called imposition of Hindi, right, on the non-Hindi speaking states of the South, right? Though here in Kerala, we voluntarily learn Hindi, but this is not the case in, for example, our sister state, Tamil Nadu, right? So that issue is left vague in the document. And again, the NEP 2020 is silent on the Right to Education Act, right? That is not very clear in this document, right? And again, going on, regarding the affirmative action policies, right? There is no specific mention of any policy directive in the document affirming the rights and reservations that are provided for SC, STs, and OBCs in academic institutions, right? There is a heavy relying on privatizing of education, right? And no alternatives are provided. I think I already mentioned this earlier. No alternatives are provided in the document for those who are socially marginalized, right? So that is something that certainly needs to be considered when we look at the document in its wholeness, right? So what we can understand is the document certainly tilts towards a higher or greater degree of privatization of the public education of this nation, right? And this is something that we have been seeing over the last, maybe shall we say, over the last 10 to 20 years. We have seen a mushrooming of private education institutions, higher education institutions that really cater only to an elite, right? That is something that the policy document seems to be encouraging. And one thing that I need to mention also is it is there on the net. When you look at the National Education Policy 2020, right? The Government of India document that is available on the net, on the very first page itself, there is a spelling mistake, right? Now, this is a public document that is provided there. The whole world can see this document. But nobody has ever thought about correcting a very important word. The word education in the first page of the document is spelled wrong. A typo error is there. Now, more than 6 months have passed since this document has come out in the public. But yet, the document that is provided online, right, that can be accessed by anybody, has this spelling mistake on its very first page. I'm mentioning this in passing, but it is something that really shows, that reflects on the kind of importance that we give in this country to a well-crafted document, particularly regarding such an important issue. Now, what we can see again is that regarding the investment GDP, the percentage of GDP, right back in 1968 in the Kothari Commission report, right, 6% of GDP was ambition. And that very same percent is still being talked about today. But we are still unable to achieve 6% of investment in education, right? So whether we can achieve this is something that remains to be seen, because for the last 50 years we have been talking about the same thing, right? And again, regarding online access, especially in this pandemic era, when, as we are doing now, when education is largely, to a large extent, is online. And we are very privileged to be living in the state of Kerala, where we have good facilities, educational facilities. We have a good fiber optic network. We have a good mobile penetration. We have a relatively very high level of our social indicators are very high, comparable to the advanced nations of the West, right? So we often forget, unfortunately, we often forget that only 24% of Indian households have internet facility, right? Only 24%, right? Only 11% of households have a functional computer. And little over 15% of rural households have access to the internet, right? We, even in our own state, in many rural areas, there is a very serious issue of network coverage, right? I know many of you students will be struggling over this issue. So in such a scenario, where the infrastructure of our country is so lacking, how can we equalize the playing field? How can we overcome the urban-rural divide in this nation? Right? Is it possible to do this in the next 20 years that the document envisages? In my opinion, it is impossible. It requires tremendous will on the part of the government. And unfortunately, the government right now is engaged in other matters. There are other diversions, right? So these are issues that remain. We need to balance, we need to look very clearly at our status. And we need to ask ourselves, what is more important? Is it building grand temples or such things? Or is it improving the educational system of this country? Right? And we can't but think of our first Prime Minister, who equated the schools, right? The new schools, the schools that are being built, to the temples of this nation. So this is something that really the present government has to really consider. What are their priorities, right? So this is my humble interpretation of the NEP. And I think I have mentioned more or less possibly everything that I can mention. So now if any comments or questions are there, I would be happy to try what I can to reply or respond to these questions. Yeah, so the questions, are they coming in the chat? Okay, in the chat I can only see feedback from.
Hello, can I ask one question?
Yeah, definitely.
Hello, Samsar.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you for your valuable thoughts on NEP in India. And congratulations, dear St. Peter's team, making this such type of initiatives. My question relating to the transparency of admission and appointment. I have some doubts, so I am asking to you regarding, is it true that NEP is putting on end to the monetary admission system in the field of college education? One of my friend paid 1.5 lakh rupees to a leading college in Kerala for post-graduation admission. Also, I witnessed another issue is some aided college take 40 lakh for new teacher appointment. This type of education trading will be end, and how will the policy affect the aided college? Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I can respond, this is certainly a very important issue, right? And especially not only in Kerala, across India, this is a very, a very controversial issue, a very dangerous issue. It is basically corruption. There is no doubt about that. Now, the NEP, without going into much detail, the NEP does seek to, to create a kind of open playing field. But again, as long as this issue of private participation is there, the private sector, as long as their clout is increasing, this kind of a tendency to take money for appointments, to accept money as a capitation fee, This is certainly is something that is there at the moment. And if the NEP can succeed in removing this evil, it would be a great success. As far as I can see in the present context, and I can speak only for the state of Kerala, like you said, this is something that is still very prevalent here in Kerala. If the NEP can succeed in removing this issue, it will require a lot of political will. It will require a strong will on the part of the central government and state governments. Unfortunately, what we see is many of our esteemed lawmakers, I'm not speaking about the state of Kerala, but I'm speaking about other states in India. What we see is education is a big business, right? Many of the esteemed lawmakers in parliament, those who are not criminals and such people, are those who have made a lot of money in the field of education, private education, right? Even a former president of India was was the president also of a great education society in Maharashtra. So we can just understand the kind of clout that is there in the private education sphere, right? And to eliminate corruption in that sphere, it will require tremendous political will, which I don't at the moment see on the part of the government, unfortunately.
So there is a question in the chat box to explain the culture of inclusion in new education policy.
Yeah. The culture of inclusion. Again, I had mentioned this in passing. There was talk of, just give me a moment to find that culture of inclusion. There was talk of a gender inclusion fund, which supports female and transgender students. This is at the school level. Now, this gender inclusion fund is something that I think is still there on paper, right? I'm not seeing it. I have not heard about it in practice, but I understand that state level, for example, in our Kerala state, we have many, we are developing many programs to support transgender students. That is something that is again very much, in the pipeline, we can say. Now, regarding the NEP, the NEP actually is lacking in this area. There is so much that needs to be done. There is so much laws that really can be made. Many laws can be made to promote a gender inclusive policies, particularly regarding the issue of transgender students and their support, right? So hopefully this NEP is not the last say in the matter, though it might have been brought out with a lot of fanfare. No doubt we will see modifications in the coming years, right? As we have seen previously, we have seen so many commissions. So hopefully, these kind of issues will be identified and further legislation will be brought, right? And not only legislation, we need to see the political will. We need to see the political will on the part of our esteemed leaders to bring these kind of laws into practice, right? Okay.
Grigory, you can move on to the last section.
Thank you, sir. Next, I'm glad to welcome Dr. Renu Susan Samuel, the Assistant Nodal Officer of IEDC and President of IIC of our college, for proposing vote of thanks.
A very good evening to all. It's my privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of the IEDC and IIC centers of St. Peter's College, Kolancheri, and its entire fraternity, and on my own behalf, I extend a very hearty thanks to our speaker, Dr. Samuel Jacob Kurivilla, for consenting to address us today and enlightening us with his views on the latest education policy. Thank you, sir. We thank Dr. Basil Matthew, Head of the Department of Political Science, for helping us reach out to Samuel sir on such a very short notice. I thank our principal, Dr. Shaju Varghese, for his continuous support in all our endeavors. Thank you, sir. Let me extend our gratitude to Sri Jean A. Varghese, IQAC Coordinator and Head of the Department of Chemistry, for offering his felicitations on this occasion. Thank you, sir. I thank Dr. Sonas Dev, Nodal Officer of IEDC and Convener of IIC, for her support throughout. Thank you, Miss. From the depth of our heart, I offer our sincere gratitude to all the audience who are present here, including our faculty members and those from other institutions, students, alumni, and all those who try to join us at this hour. Thank you all so much for your cooperation. Last but not the least, I thank our IEDC and IIC student members for all the support on and off the screen. Thank you, dear students.
Thank you, ma'am. All the participants are requested to fill the feedback form, which is provided right now in the chat box. Once again, thank you everyone for participating in this orientation session. The meeting is over. You may now leave after filling the feedback form.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.